Hi, I'm Toni. Welcome to So Lounge. Today we are talking about buttons. Now, I love buttons. I collect them. I bought this at a antique store in Central Texas, same place I got that thimble. And I just love buttons and jars. It's something that just makes me happy. So I've always got plenty of buttons handy. And whenever I get a new garment and it's got those little buttons on it, I always snip them off and put them in one of my jars. So I'll have them in case the button falls off or I lose it at some point later in the future. Today I'm going to show you how to sew buttons back onto your clothing. Now I went through my closet and I couldn't find anything because I tend to just sew buttons back on as soon as they start getting loose because I don't want to lose them because I like buttons so much. But I'm sure many of you out there have a bunch of stuff that needs some buttons, that need some tightening up. And today I'm going to show you how to do that. We are going to be learning two different ways today. So one of them is just a standard button, and that's one of the ones with the 4 holes in it, just like a regular button. And then the other kind of button is a shank button, and that's the button where it doesn't have any holes on the front, but there's a little metal loop or plastic loop on the back that will, and that's what you're going to put the thread through to attach the button. So you sew them similarly, but they're a little bit different. So I'm going to show you both today. And before we get started, to do this, you're going to need some needles, hand sewing needles. You're going to need some thread. I'm using white so that you can see what I'm doing against this purple fabric. And ideally, though, you want to match the thread with the same color of thread that the garment was sewn in. So whatever the button was originally sewn with, or if you're just replacing one, you want to go with what the other button colors are. That's the easiest way to do it. And then, of course, you're going to need a thimble because you're hand sewing. If you don't know how to use a thimble, head on over to the thimble video and I walk you through step by step. You really need a thimble for this because usually when you're sewing a button, it's going to be to the placket, which is like the front part of the shirt. That's going to be a little bit thicker, and you're going to use that thimble to push your needle through your fabric to sew your button back on. So you've got your supplies ready. Let's go in for a closer look. This is just a close-up of everything you're going to need, and of course I forgot to mention you need some thread snips. Hand needles, thimble. This is a tailor's thimble, that's why there's a hole in the top. You can use whatever thimble you have. Thread. Make sure that the thread matches the thread holding the other buttons on. If you are mending and putting back one button, if you're changing them all out, you can pick whatever thread you want. It can be contrasting or matchy-matchy. This is the basic button. This is probably the button you have all over your wardrobe on a variety of different things in a variety of different sizes. It's basically a standard plastic 4-hole button. And then there is the shank button. So, oops. From the front, the shank button doesn't have any holes, but it has this handy little loop on the back, which is made out of metal or plastic to use to attach it to the front of a garment. So these are kind of fancier buttons. This is from one of my suits, and I'm going to show you how to sew both of them today. First step is to thread your needle. Now, I like a little bit longer needle. It's easier to hold, your hand doesn't cramp, so go with the needle that you are most comfortable with. This one is about 1.5 inches long, so it is a little bit longer. I'm going to be holding it like this and then pushing through with the thimble. So if you don't know how to use a thimble, head on over to the thimble video and watch it. Trust me, making the effort to learn to use a thimble will save your hands and actually help you when you're hand sewing. When you are threading a needle, you want to take your thread, and you don't need a crazy amount of thread. So you're going to, oops, this is the end of a spool that I'm using for this. That's the wrong end. There we go. That's the right end. So we're just going to have 1 arm's length of thread, and that's how you would determine how much you need. And this is a standard measurement for most hand sewing things. So you don't really want any thread longer than this because then it has the opportunity to get tangled and make a mess. I'm going to snip it off and I'm going to thread my needle. And then once I have my needle threaded, I think we need to go in for a closer look. Once you've got the eye of your needle threaded, you want to double up the thread and then come down to the other end Where's the other end? There it is. So you want to get both ends of the thread together, and then you want to tie them in a knot. And however you like to do that, however it works best for you. I got to get mine lined up. There we go. So I just flip them around my finger, push them through, make one knot. I like to put 2 knots into this just so it holds nice and tight. It is a button, so it's got more wear and tear. And there we go. When you're reattaching a button, there will be holes in your garment where the location of the button used to be. Now, those are really useful for getting everything relined up. Sometimes they have a little bit of thread in them, so pull that out before you get started. Since I made this placket as a sample for this video, I don't have any holes in my fabric, so I marked them through the button using some chalk. If you don't have button holes, or you can't find them, you can always do the same thing and get a marking pen or pencil and just mark the holes so you know where you want to put your button. Just make sure it is lined up with the buttonhole on the other side of the placket so that everything works together. Take your button out of the way, and we are going to start with these holes down here. Now, I'm going to pass my needle through the back of the fabric first, and I'm going to start with this hole, this top hole that is closest to the outside of the placket. And I'm going to pass the needle through using my thimble to push it, and then I'm going to pull my thread through by hand. Then I'm going to take my needle, slide the button through the hole, and get it all lined up. Now at this point, you can decide if you want to go across the needle to make a cross pattern like that, so it's going to make the cross, or if you want to keep it straight and just go across to the other side, so you'll have a single loop here and you'll have a loop here. Totally up to you. I'd suggest that you check the other buttons and see how it was sewn on in the first place. I like the little X's because I think they look a little bit more designer. It's just personal preference. You can do whatever you want. So next you're going to go catty corner to the bottom button that is on the inside of the placket, and put your needle through. You can use your thimble to give it a little push, and then you're going to pull the thread through. And I didn't have it lined up, so it's kind of bunching. Just ease your thread through. This is just the initial steps of getting the button in the right place. So then your thread and needle are now on the back side of the fabric. You want to come up through the next hole, which is going to be the bottom hole closest to the outside of the placket. You want to come up through that hole or that marking, and you want to go through your button again. So it's okay if your thread is loose during this process. You're just getting everything lined up, totally fine to have it loose, and you can adjust it accordingly. So I've got my thread all lined up. I'm now going across the button to make the cross to the top inside hole, and then I'm going to pull my needle through to the back. So now we've made one pass through everything, and this is just going to hold our needle in the right place of where it's supposed to be. Now from the back, we have to go through the next hole. So we're going back up into the button where the knot is. So you want to get that lined up. And then we're going to pull that through. And you don't want to pull too tight because you don't want this thread under here, this fabric, to bunch up. So just make sure you hold your thread and that you're keeping this part of the fabric a little bit taut. It's okay if you do, but we just don't want it to be too bunchy. So we've come back up the hole that we started with, and we're going to make the cross again. And this time around, we are adding more thread to this little cross to secure the button to the garment. So you just repeat the process. You can go back through the same hole on this side. You don't want to bunch up the fabric, so don't pull too tight. Pull that through and see how it looks. Then we're going to go back across to the top buttonhole. and pull it through. And then on the back side, we're coming back up where the needle is. So now we have made 2 passes through the button, and this is probably good enough, but I like to go through a 3rd time just to be on the safe side, because you don't want this to fall off after you've already made the effort. 1 more time around, not a big deal. So repeat the process for the 3rd time, and then you can flip it over, go back through to the top of the button, make your cross again, and then we are back on this side. Now, you do not need to go back through again. We can catch the fabric here underneath. Just don't go up to the top side, and make a knot just next to our other one. There we go. And then just loop it off. And I like to put in 2 knots to be on the safe side, because you don't want to go through this process and then have your button fall off. So there we go. We're going to snip that thread on the back, snip it close, make sure you don't cut off your knot by accident. I've done that before. And then snip the other threads so you have a little bit of a showing from one side, but you've got your button all nice and sewn on. There's a little bit of movement in there so that you can get it through the buttonhole. And that is it. Moving on to the shank button, just like before, there will likely be a hole or 2 holes in your fabric where the button had originally been. I just marked 1, and I'm going to show you why. So just pass your needle through that initial hole, and then we are going to pass it through the shank. Now we want to pass it through right to left because we're going to be continuing the stitch towards the bottom part of the garment. So your shank button is going to be a little bit unruly. It's going to roll around a little more. Now, you may just have 1 hole in your fabric, or you may have 2 that are very, very close together. And that's because you can see how they're unruly. Okay, so let me get that lined up. Okay. When we're sewing this, we want it to be tight so it doesn't go all over the place. There we go. And we want to come back in really close to where the initial holes. I'm just going to drop that shank button for a second, and we want to come in really close. There you go, you can see that now. There we go. Next to the other thread when we put the needle back in, because we want the shank to be tight, and we want the thread to be tight holding it in place. So once you kind of have it lined up, now there may be a hole here and there may not. I can't say what's going on in your garment, but this is kind of the way that you want to do this. You want it to be tight. And you're passing it from left to right so that you go through the shank and then back through the fabric. And so we're just pulling this up. Now you can see how small that stitch is, but it's catching it on both sides, and it's going to more or less hold it in place. So when we go back to the other side, we want to go back through the fabric near the knot, and then we want to go through the shank again, right to left, because we want to make sure we go through it. And then you can pull it out, pull it through, and then go back in to next to the little hole that we made for the thread. And if you come around to the back side, you can see where you're supposed to put it. Push that needle through. And I'm making a mess. There we go. Now everything's lined up right. So we're pulling that through, and we're going to hold that shank tight so it's not moving up and down on that stitch. One more time. Back through where the knot is. I'm going to go up there. We're going to go through the shank right to left. And then we're going to come back right here next to the other threads that we've gone through. and pull it through. Now you can see that there's still some movement there, but it's not all over the place. Once you've gone through about 3 times, it's probably good. And you can always do 4 if it makes you happy. And we've gone through 3 times. No, that looks like only 2. Okay, one more time. Through the part by the needle, up through the shank, right to left. And then we are going to go back next to the row of stitches we've already put in. Pull your thread through. There's an extra loop that didn't catch. So you can just take your needle, grab it, and then get it all smoothed out. Now we're back to the back. That's where our fabric was looping. Thread was looping. You can just pull this through to the other side. There we go. So now you've got your nice flat threads on one side. Your shank is in place, and you can see there's a couple of little stitches there. You're kind of lining them up next to each other. Let's see if I can get, there we go. Lining them up next to each other here, and that's going to hold the shank of the button in place. Now it's still going to move side to side, but that's fine. So from the back, we want to finish this up, and we are going to make a knot to secure the end of that thread. And I'm putting this on the other stitch side from the initial knot so that it's held on both sides of the thread loops. And then we're going to put in a second knot, because 2 knots are always better than 1. Then I'm going to grab my thread scissors, snip these off. Make sure you don't accidentally cut your knots. That has happened before and it's a pain. So there we go. So that is the underside. And then your shank button is all nice and attached. Now you know how to sew on buttons 2 different ways. So these are the most common types of buttons, and I'm trying to think if there's any other buttons I've ever seen out there. I'm sure they might have some artsy buttons, but for the most part, you will either be sewing on a regular button or a shank button, and now you know how to do that. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to click like below and subscribe to my channel so you never miss a stitch. And if you've got questions, but no one to answer them, head on over to Let's Talk Sewing for Beginners, hosted by So Lounge. It's an interactive Facebook group where you can ask all the questions you want, and I will get you some answers. I go live in the group on Wednesdays, so check the events tab for the schedule. Until we meet again, happy sewing!